Welcome to the Innovation Storytellers Podcast. We talk to innovators and disruptors in R&D, product managers, entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs, innovation thought leaders, and their storytellers who help bring their amazing ideas to life. Now, here's your host, innovation storyteller, CEO, speaker, and coach to the world's top innovation teams, Susan Lindner.
Welcome to Innovation Storytellers. I'm Susan Lindner, and for the last 20 years, I've been helping innovators and disruptors to tell their stories. 10 acquisitions, hundreds of innovative products, and countless hockey stick growth patterns, not to mention a whole bunch of failures along the way. I wanted to share great innovations and how they get to market from the voices of the people who help get them there. And stories are that rocket fuel that help guide those innovations through organizations large and small, all the way to market and maybe even beyond. I'm so honored to be joined today by Steve Rader, who is the CEO of Crowd Resources Consulting. Steve is a speaker consultant to open innovation projects and companies, and focuses on now the future of work based on his 30 years at NASA, with the last 7 years dedicated to scaling up open innovation and open talent initiatives across NASA and the US federal government. Steve has a mechanical engineering degree from Rice University and has worked in various roles at NASA, including flight controller, software developer, project manager, systems engineer, communication systems architect, and innovation manager. If there's nothing else in that list, Steve, I'm not sure, probably even more than that. Steve and I had the good fortune of meeting on the conference circuit, speaking around topics of innovation and storytelling. And I'm so grateful to have Steve on the show because he has some of the greatest innovation stories of all time. Thank you so much for joining us today, Steve.
Oh, thank you, Susan. I just love being on here with you. You are a little bit of my hero when it comes to storytelling. So I love being on here.
Thank you so much. So, Steve, I know this open innovation has been a passion of yours for a long time. But open innovation is not a concept that a lot of people know or understand. And some people, if they do know it, are not so excited about it. Why would that be? Well, first tell us what it is and why we should care.
Sure. So open innovation, the way I explain it, is open simply is going beyond your normal group, right? So whether that's outside of your team or outside of your company or, going worldwide, that's opening things up, right? And then the innovation part is, finding that really high value thing that's going to make a difference for you, that's novel, that you aren't finding through your traditional mechanisms. And so what we found is open innovation is basically accomplished by crowdsourcing and by what we find is curated crowds. So these crowds that are out there that have already formed. It's not just posting a challenge out there for anyone to participate, although people can do that. What we find is curated crowds are these communities of passion where people have gathered 1.5 million software developers like Topcoder, or 100,000 filmmakers like Tongle, or if you're freelancer, 47 million people around freelance work of different types. And each of these communities has kind of a standard operating procedure, how they work. Some of it's they get bids and they do work. Sometimes it's a contest or a challenge. Sometimes it's a mix. At Topcoder, they'll take a software project and chop it up into lots of little contests. And then you'll have the best people at each type of working. So the best user interface people compete on that challenge, and the best people at testing get involved there. And so what you find is you're getting innovation at every layer of that software design. The secret behind all this is really diversity, right? So innovation, like anybody who's in innovation knows, diversity is the secret. It's the secret sauce. And the way I describe it is, in today's world, you've got this super rapid pace of change, and you've got this technology explosion. 90% of all scientists that have ever lived on planet Earth are alive today. Like if you look at the curves for PhDs or the curves for patent applications, we're way up on this curve. And there's just so much going on that you can't just Google the latest and greatest technologies, which is what you really need, right? You get all these developments going on, nanotechnology and machine learning and additive manufacturing, but you've got to translate those things into solutions and innovative solutions. And what we find is that the crowd is really good at connecting the dots and bringing diverse solutions from other industries and from other cultures and other countries and pulling those together and applying them to your problem. So it kind of, the crowd acts as this dragnet across all of these industries to find the solutions that you can then take and apply to make your innovation.
Did you just say that the crowd is more intelligent than the HR department? Is that what I'm understanding? Because you're finding these awesome solutions, not to put words in your mouth, Steve.
No, the crowd is a fascinating thing. And in fact, there's some great books. Clay Shirky wrote one on cognitive surplus, and there's been a whole bunch of other books that are just really fascinating about what the capacity is. But it doesn't come for free. And the reason we couldn't do this before is, you not only have to appeal to a lot of people, you have to figure out how to filter all of the noise, right, to get to the signal, right? That's a real nerdy way of saying, how do you find through all of the chaff what the value is? It's kind of like having 4 tons of ore dumped on your front lawn. That's great if you have processing equipment that can find the diamonds and the gems, but if you can't, that's not helpful, right? It's not going to be something you can deal with. And the same with crowdsourcing. These curated communities have ways to pose the problem so that you attract the right people that actually have the capability to solve this, but also have the diversity to solve it. Got great stories on that I can tell. You've got to have ways to filter things down. So you've got to ask them the right questions. Like, you've got to show me how this is going to solve this problem and validate that. We actually had the space poop challenge. I know it's like when I was at NASA, we have lots of bodily fluids that we deal with. And that challenge had
no joke.
We had 20,000 registrants for that challenge. And
what was the challenge, Steve? How was it defined?
So, space poop challenge. I love talking about this one.
Don't we all?
If you go on the Orion spacecraft, which is the capsule that they're building now for deep space exploration, and let's just say you're just going to the moon. When you make that burn to the moon, that's a one-way thing, right? You only have propellant to come back under certain conditions. So when you point at the moon and you make that burn, you're headed to the moon. And the soonest you're going to get back is 6 days. And so if right after that burn or any time after that burn, your cabin develops a leak, you have to hop back in your orange launch and entry pressure suit and live for 6 days. And then you have all sorts of bodily functions that have to happen. And some of that stuff can really be caustic and unhealthy for the skin and cause real problems after 6 days. Think 6 days of diaper rash, right? Oof. Really bad.
Yeah.
So that was our challenge. And it was really great, too, because out of all that, HeroX actually filtered those 5,000 down to about 100. And our group actually worked to get it down to the manageable set. And the winner of that was, I talk about diversity. He was a flight surgeon. So he knew all about pressure suits from San Antonio, who actually built all these really cool little prototypes. And his real innovation that he brought was, he said, I'm a surgeon, and in laparoscopic surgery, we inflate the belly up to about 15 PSI, which is about the same as a suit. And so he said, we have this little airlock that we insert that we can pass wipes and little instruments through, and that would seem to be the perfect solution for what you need here. And it was one of these things where in this industry, there was a solution. Someone was able to connect the dots and introduce that over here in a different need. And I think that we see that pattern over and over In fact, MIT studied Innocentive's successes. So
what's Innocentive, Steve?
Innocentive is this crowd of about 400,000 problem solvers. So think about all those people you know that love a good crossword puzzle, or they love solving hard problems, and they're interesting but quirky to talk to at dinner gathering, right? Because they remember all the math from college, but have a hard time with conversation. But they all get together on this one platform to solve hard problems. And Innocentive has been around for a long time. They were a real pioneer, and their 400,000 people had solved a bunch of problems. In fact, they had something like an 80% solve rate in 2016. So MIT studied that. And that means companies were bringing them unsolved problems, and 80% of the time they were solving them. I know, right? So when they did that, MIT studied all those solutions, and what they found was 70% of the time that someone solved a problem, that person was not in the domain of the problem owner. So if you were a chemist with a chemistry problem, 70% of the time it wasn't going to be a chemist that brought you your innovation. And 75% of the time, the solution was already known. It already existed. It just, somebody had to connect dots and pull that innovation over and help you have a better starting point. And that's really where we've gotten with this, is we describe that as, we want to help you find a better starting place for you to go innovate. And we do that because, as you know, and we've talked about, when you bring innovation into an industry, people resist. They're like, I want to be the innovator. I don't want to outsource the most fun part of my job. And so that's where we've gotten at NASA, where I've worked and still work. This is my part-time gig here.
Your side hustle, Steve?
My side hustle, which I think is really important. I can talk at length about the importance of side gigs. But yeah, innovation in industry is tough because it comes sideways at production and getting things done, and managers are trained to reject it, and individuals feel like that one time they get to innovate, they don't want to outsource that. And so we really had to change our message to be, get a better starting point, that the world's moving too fast. And you really would never start with a computer that was 10 years old or software that was 15 years old. Well, guess what? If you just Google what the latest and greatest technology is, you're not going to find the latest and greatest. You're going to find 5 and 10-year-old technology. And so if you really want to find the latest and greatest, you got to use the good tools. The good tools are crowdsourcing.
Yes. So, I remember the first time I met you, you told a phenomenal story about how, because I think some people believe that crowdsourcing is really only available to big high-tech companies that can post these kinds of contests, number one. Or number two, it's a one-off contest that Lay's Potato Chip throws out there to figure out whether or not it's going to be sriracha, dill pickle, or black truffle as the next flavor of their potato chip. But speaking of potato chips, right? I mean, even something as mundane and delicious as a potato chip still has really technical problems that can be solved with crowdsourcing. Can you share that awesome potato chip story with our listeners?
Yeah, I actually learned this from my friends at Innocentive. So it was really fascinating. There was a potato chip company, unnamed, that came with a problem of how do they get the grease off of their potato chips more effectively. So they were doing it, right? They were vibrating the sheet of chips as it came out of the oil to shake the oil off, but it would break a lot of the chips, right? And we as humans only like the big chips because we're weird that way. And so they wanted to have a better yield, right? They wanted to have more chips that were unbroken with less oil. And it's really interesting because the very first thing that the company did, this curated crowd company did, was they changed the problem statement. And instead of posting a challenge that said, we want to get the grease off of potato chips, they posted a challenge that said, how can we remove a viscous fluid from a delicate wafer. And I think that was just brilliant, right? Because there's two things they did there. One, they kind of hid the fact that this was a potato chip company and that this was a potato chip problem. Many companies and organizations I talk to, the first things they say is, well, I can never crowdsource my stuff. The intellectual property that I'll be sharing, I can't expose that. And that's just a smokescreen. It's people are doing this all the time. Companies are using these mechanisms all the time, but they're obscuring the problem. They're decomposing their problem into something smaller that won't show who they are or what give away their competitive advantage. There are ways around it and still leverage the open innovation. And that's what these guys were doing. The second thing it did, though, which I think for the innovation part was even more brilliant, which is instead of just appealing to food scientists and food production engineers, who were mostly mechanical engineers, right? That's why the solution was to vibrate the tray of chips.
So they're building bridges or shaking potato chips? This is what the college prospects are today.
One of the things we study is vibration. And in fact, mechanical engineers are the world's experts on vibration. Little known fact. Wire bridges don't vibrate apart. And what's fascinating is that's also your food production, you guys. And the reason I say that is the solution that came in on this came in from outside of that, because that problem statement appealed to more than just food production engineers, right? How to remove a viscous fluid from a delicate wafer. Think about that for a second. That could be a physicist, a biologist, somebody working on silicon wafers. It really could just be anyone that understood physics. It sounds really nerdy, but it actually opened up the problem. And in fact, the solution was to vibrate the air around the chip at this resonant frequency that the oil would just shake off the chip. And the solution, the one who gave that solution was a violinist who, I would argue, is also an expert in vibration. But here's what I tell people. It was vibration. It was a vibration solution that the world's experts in vibration, mechanical engineers, had remained blind to for years. And that's what we see if you read Warren Berger's work on A More Beautiful Question or several books out there. What you find is in these deep domains where there's experts, they are blind to some really obvious innovation because they construct a whole kind of list of rules and what they can do that their people won't violate. And so they actually have innovations that are just out of reach that they can't get. We actually did a challenge with NIST not too long ago when I was at NASA, and it was on differential.
What's NIST, Steve?
NIST is the National Institute for Standards and Technologies. They're the ones that say an inch is this long and a pound is this much.
Okay. That's and why we never adopted the metric system for some ungodly reason.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
We'll get into that. That's a whole sore point. But they're trying to work with how do you do what they call differential privacy, which is how do you make sensitive data available for things like machine learning and for people to use, but without exposing the sensitive stuff. So for firefighters, for instance, it would be great if they could get access to information about apartment buildings, but a lot of that's classified as personal information, so they can't get it. So how can they do that in a way that won't violate people's privacy? And what's really interesting is there's a lot of academic work that's been going on with this. And when we ran a competition, one of the things that we found with one of the folks who had competed was she was a grad student. And most of the work had been done by grad students and lead professors in research around the country. And they said, we actually loved this because I was able to work on solutions that my professor never would have let me work on. And I had no fear of failing. Like if this didn't work, who cares? I submitted, there's no loss. And I think we forget that, people say you've got to be able to fail if you want to innovate, but we forget it's expensive to fail. It's embarrassing to fail. Our bosses don't like us to fail. And these open innovation contests kind of open up this possibility of failure. And if you think about it, what you're really getting with a crowdsourced challenge when you get several hundred submissions is you're getting massive failure, right?
That's right.
Because you're only going to get the best one, and that's what you're going to award, and everyone else failed. And we kind of gloss over the fact that, yeah, everybody else failed, which is wonderful in the innovation world because it means everyone tried something different. Another story, Roche Diagnostics. This is a case study out of London Business School. This is like a multi-billion-dollar R&D company, right, that does biomedical research. They had been trying to dip their toe into this stuff, and they were trying Innocent out. And they brought in like their top 10 unsolved problems. And one of those was this very specific sensor that they needed to get this in vitro diagnostic machine to work. They had been working on that problem for 15 years of proprietary research.
Wow.
No solution, right?
So that didn't cost them anything, right? That was free. Right? All that learning, that was no problem.
Right? So they put it out on Innocent for 60 days, $20,000 prize. And not only did it get solved, right? In fact, 2 independent solvers submitted the same solution, which meant it really existed out there already, and they just didn't know about it. Somebody identified it for them. But when they looked at all of the submissions that they had received, they saw everything that they had tried in 15 years of proprietary research had been replicated in 60 days.
Wow.
And this was when their community was only 120,000 or so. Like, that shouldn't, like, if you think about it, 120,000 random people shouldn't have enough expertise, right? In our heads, we don't think of crowds that way, but they do. And in fact, crowds, you can almost count on them always having not only a breadth of knowledge, but a depth that is super surprising. And I think it goes to that passion, right? People are joining these because they're passionate, and passionate people can do amazing things.
Amen. Yeah. Yeah, that's what Margaret Mead said, right? Leave it to a group of passionate people to get something done. In fact, they're the only ones who ever have. And so I'll quote an anthropologist wherever I possibly can, being one myself. So, but, you know, it raises a really interesting point. The violinist who solves the potato chip conundrum, right? And the random group of strangers who wind up solving an issue that has plagued Roche for 15 years. I have yet to see a budget line item entitled failure with a large number associated with it. I have yet to see a group of engineers who say, please outsource the most exciting part of my work. The opposition to crowdfunding is fear-based. Is that right, Steve? And what is the fear, and what is the story that, aside from the beautiful ones that you've shared with us, what is the story that has to overcome the fear of allowing strangers into my house? Yeah. Do we need to say to people at any given time, for the problems that you have, you cannot hire all of humanity to figure out who has the answer? Is that the story we need to tell inside to allow the strangers inside the house?
Gosh, there's so many things going on right now that contribute to this. The complexity of our world has increased in ways that most people don't fully appreciate. Like, it's just really, to have an organization right now, just think about all the skills necessary for just your IT department: cybersecurity, networks, cloud, applications, mobile apps, deployment. Like, it's really harrowing. And a few years ago, like 15 years ago, it was one person usually per company, or per small company at least. And now, even if you're a small company, you're expected to have somebody try to handle all of that. And that goes on for your enterprise knowledge software, all of your AI, that if you're going to survive as a company, you've got to have AI. So all of these things are kind of pressing on the workforce. But then the biggest thing I've seen is that people want to own things. They want to point to something and say, I did that. And they care about their own innovation. And so if you're in a company for a long time, you actually probably have an innovation that's yours, right? But that's now the thing that you have to improve on. Well, if you're the one that innovated, I now own that solution. And one of the things we talk about a lot is you have to transition people from being solution owners to being problem owners. Because if you're a problem owner, then you're always looking for something that can solve that problem better, right? Because it's never ever solved, right? It's always about solving it better, getting a better performance, cheaper, faster, whatever. And so we say, hey, look, you need to transform, because if you're a solution owner, you're going to be protective of that innovation. And you're actually going to not want anybody else to come in and make improvements on your system. It's
on your mousetrap, sure.
Exactly. So we see that all the time. And in fact, that's that messaging I talked about earlier, where we actually come in and say, hey, look, we're not going to show the crowd member solving your problem. What we're going to show you is your peer who is doing amazing things that you're going to be compared with. And they're doing that by finding a better starting point and by becoming a problem owner. And by doing those subtle things, we've started to build cases where we've got a lot more snowball built. And it's just like that. I really think it's something you've got to grow, because it's almost word of mouth of a little bit of FOMO, a little bit of fear of missing out of, I'm not producing something that is 5x, 10x better. And these guys are. And you've got to get enough of that going. But it's bizarre because you can't do it top down as a dictate, because everyone will revolt. You have to kind of what I call boil the frog, frog.
Slowly and surely.
Slowly turn up the heat. And you have to just build cases and build storytelling and build like this kind of legend of, hey, NASA's doing amazing things here, with engagement of the public to do the work of space exploration, or to do, whatever industry you're in. We're engaging our customers. You talked about Lay's. They actually don't do those challenges to find new flavors, to get new flavors. They know what all the flavors are. They're doing it to get a following of people that are passionate about potato chips and feel ownership in them because they participated in a challenge. Like, challenges are a way to bring people together in kind of surprising ways, but you have to kind of coax the workforce into it, I think.
Yes. And corporate America has not made it easy, right? It's innovate or die is something that we hear all the time, and it had better be you doing the innovating. And sometimes the most innovative idea you can bring in is open innovation, to say, we can't do it alone. But the crowd can, and let's invite them in.
Absolutely. And in fact, we talked earlier about how technology is exploding and the rapid change of new jobs and new skills. I'm fairly convinced our old model of let's hire a bunch of people, and then, HR is about acquiring and retaining talent, right? Well, if you do that in this day and age, every 2 years or shorter, you're needing to bring in new skills. Well, we don't fire people that quickly. And so this HR construct isn't geared to lay off and move people through that fast. And it's not geared to train people. I was talking to a freelancer not too long ago, one of the lead freelancers at Topcoder. And I asked him on a panel, I said, how much of your time do you spend learning new languages, learning new technologies? And my jaw hit the floor when he answered, because he said, 60% of my time.
Wow. Wow.
I said, how do you make any money? He goes, oh no, I make 5 times what anyone else in Greece makes. That's where he lived. I know not everyone's going to spend 60% of their time doing lifelong learning, but it really set a bit for me of, this is where we live. We live in an age of relentless change, to where the winners are investing their time in lifelong learning. And the people that are failing, they're stuck in these traditional models where they can't, companies cannot train. The average expenditure on training per year is $1,000 per employee per year.
Wow.
And that's usually compliance and, security training. It's not about the new latest. So here's what I tell people. I say, look, use open innovation, use open talent to go find these people and bring their solutions and them in. And what you find is your internal teams will now start working with the latest and greatest technology, the latest and greatest skills. And it rubs off because if they bring in a new language or a new setup or a new technology, now you got to work with it. And working with stuff is such a better crash course than trying to go off for 3 weeks of training, right? In the hopes that you're going to bring in some. It's just it mashes up. I even tell organizations, I say, if you really want your workforce to be innovative, give them 5% of their time or 10% of their time to go freelance. Let them, and it's kind of like remote work. Remember when we started remote work, some people were doing it anyway, and they finally said, look, okay, fine. Here are the guidelines. You have to do these things. You can't be taking care of your kids. You got to do this. And you put guide rails on it. Do the same thing with gig work. Look, you can have gig work. Don't sell our secrets. Don't, do it within these. Don't let your day job suffer. But what you'll find is, and this is one of the reasons I took on this side gig of consulting, because I wanted to see if it was true. And it is absolutely true. Your side work exposes you to all this other new technology and new ways of doing business that then you naturally bring back into the organization. And so there's this way, if you look at what the real problem people are facing is, the real problem is upskilling. It's keeping up with the latest and greatest tech. It's not necessarily all the things that people are focusing on, which is how do I squeeze more out of these people? Anyway, I can go on and on about that.
Yeah, it's about putting more in. It's interesting. This is a conversation I have with my son who just graduated from the Rochester Institute of Technology with a degree in video game design and development. And it's a phenomenal course. And the games that he likes to play are those really at the cutting edge. And so I ask him, how do your professors learn how to teach you how to code to create those next generation of cutting edge games if they have been your professor for the last 5 years, for the last 10 years?
Yeah.
How is it that, and thinking about our technical talent all over the world, how will our professors, continue to keep up if they do not immerse themselves in the commercial side of work or even in the academic and research side of work in order to help our children continue to be at the forefront? And as my kid has his first job at his first game design studio, so proud. But even as he does that, how can he bring back that learning, to campus and say, hey, prof, guess what I learned this summer? I'm coding at a whole level that I never thought I would before. And this is stuff that, your classrooms need to know now.
Yeah. And you're hitting on something that we're at a really interesting transitional time with COVID and learning. But I think it's been coming for a while where the changes we talk about are coming so fast that really universities can't keep up. If you think about it, when a new technology comes up, it takes a couple of years for it to get to a critical mass where then they'll spend a couple of years developing a curriculum. And then you got 4 or 5 years of putting students through. So you're at 8 to 10 years lag on producing students. Now, the grad students are working on the cutting edge, but that's a fraction of the students that are getting that. And it's only in these little tiny areas. So I really do think there's an opportunity here for education. And I would say what we're seeing is that's what's happening in a lot of these curated communities, is people are going there to learn. There's a great story when the Homeland Security was doing a challenge on improving the scanner you go through at the airport where you hold up your hands. And it was run on Kaggle, right? And they have I think 7 million data science nerds on Kaggle. It's really an amazing platform. And one of the 5th place winners won $100,000. He was a freshman at Berkeley.
Wow.
When he started the challenge, didn't know machine learning and took the challenge on as a way to learn machine learning.
Oh, how cool. Better than any Coursera course, right?
Exactly. And he gets to the part of his little course, because he's kind of working through online course materials as he's doing it. And he gets to the part where it says, now you have your model constructed, feed as much learning data, training data as you can into your algorithm. Well, Homeland Security had only supplied this one set. It was really hard to work with, this really big data set. Well, he knew how to use Blender, which is used by probably your son in video games to make lifelike characters. Well, basically, these are monochromatic, bodies with weapons hidden on them, right? And so he created a little script to create thousands of little images of little people with weapons hidden on them. And he was able to create thousands of images that look just like the millimeter wave scans and ran them through his algorithm. So his algorithm got really, really smart. And Homeland Security tried to actually hire him during that exit interview. And he said no. It was It was the most fascinating thing I've ever seen. But it is the innovation, is going to come from an out of left field.
An unknown source, yep.
These platforms are gathering people that are passionate about learning, and you just never know where that innovation is going to come from.
It's just fantastic. And I think one other piece of this, and so important to the work that you do, Steve, is how we tell the story around this future of work. Because obviously COVID has been a game changer from all of us, and WTF has become WFH, right? We're all like, everyone's working from home. You and I were just joking. It's like, oh, every day is bring my family to work day. And no one never knows what time one should shut off the computer or get started again. But even more importantly, as enterprises begin to understand that the future of work is fluid, and that in order to truly solve the biggest challenges facing companies and their customers, they must look outside their four walls, because frankly, we don't even sit in them anymore.
Right.
And so when you think about those first, like initiating those conversations about changing how we do business, and how we hire people, and how the full-time employee sits next to the gigger, sits next to the part-time employee, and gets the job done. What is the shift that has to happen from a mindset perspective at a big company to allow the human innovation to take place?
It is vast. You would be amazed. Like we're talking human capital has to change, procurement has to change, legal has to change, everyone. Balaji Bandili is the head of Deloitte's Pixel program, which is their open innovation program.
She's amazing.
Yeah. And they just released the Harvard Business School study of his work. It's really great. But one of the things that they did recently is they, in their HR system, they basically made it agnostic. Like when you're trying to find who's the right person to work on my team, it won't tell you whether that person's an employee, a freelancer, or some contractor. You're literally just looking at their qualifications. Because what they were finding is people had big biases about what contractors would do versus what freelancers would do versus what the actual employees would do. And what we tell people is, look, you would be amazed at the credentials of some of the people that you can find out there. And especially if you're not asking to own them. We forget companies employing people are effectively trying to own them. Like they really try to lock you down, right? They don't let you do what you want. You're going to do what's good for them. And so a lot of people are rejecting that. So people are migrating out of the workforce for traditional organizations and into the freelance at like 3 times the rate of the normal workforce growth.
Is that by choice or by force?
By choice. Oh, it could be both, but there's some data to indicate a lot of people are just kind of fed up. And what they're finding is In the old world, you had to go, find all your own customers. You had to stand up all your own equipment. It was a hard thing. Now what you're finding is these kinds of freelance platforms like Freelancer, like Upwork, like TopTal, they find the work in a global marketplace and they bring it to you at a task level. And then you get to decide, do I want to do this or not? Mm-hmm. And that agency and flexibility that goes right in hand with remote work, by the way, is something that people have really been missing. And, as if you're noticing, industry used to be all about reliability. I could grow old here. I could rely on this job, and it's safe. It's a lot of security. There's not much flexibility, and I have to go and do exactly what they tell me. Whereas over in freelance world, it was, well, I don't have any stability, and I may or may not get paid next week, but at least I have my flexibility. And now what we're finding is this is crumbling over here, right? People are getting laid off. All of those benefits are starting to erode. And so the security and stability of this construct is starting to go away, and people are starting to build more stability into these platforms. And so it's not quite there yet, but I honestly think I started to become very positive about it, because if you look at the world as less of a scarcity model and more of there's so much going on around the world, and we're now connected in a way that there's a lot of work to be done. And if you can pivot to what skills are needed quickly, and that's what you got to be able to do, there are ways to connect people to the work you need to do, and it offers this opportunity of lifelong learning. And honestly, if you look at what automation and the pace of change is bringing, that's what we need for our workforce. Our workforce needs to be able to turn on a dime, be constantly learning, be always moving to that next job. I kind of think we're kind of like domesticated animals right now. We've forgotten how to hunt. We need to teach our workforce, hey, there are a lot of platforms out here where you can find work, and there's a lot of places you can develop your skills. And there's some new models for lifelong learning that are just fascinating. Paro.io is an accounting freelance organization where they use machine learning to match the freelancer with the task, but they match them such that they have to actually stretch to get that task done. So by the time they finish the task, they're smarter.
Wow.
To learn. And then they have some people supporting them so that they make sure they can reach back and get the job done. But think about that for a minute. Imagine an Uber where instead of just driving a car all the time, that every time you got in that car and drove a shift, at the end of that, you had some new skill that you could then apply and meet some more need. And that's what we're starting to see is platforms that are providing kind of lifelong learning in ways that don't require you to quit your job and spend $10,000 for 6 months of training at a community college or a regular university. And you'll still have regular universities, but I think this new lifelong learning that stretches all the way from YouTube videos to Coursera's to Khan Academy to, full-blown college courses, all of these are going to be melded together into something that's a lot more exciting. And I think the future holds the possibility of more people doing their passion and less people having that kind of Dilbert cartoon experience with work, where your soul is sucked out of you by staff meetings and by, forms and process.
Bureaucracy, yeah.
There will still be organizations and there will still be employees, because you have to have a core that holds the soul of a company. But anything that is kind of can be transportable, graphics, design work, engineering, software, all of these things, you don't necessarily have to be owned by that company. You can learn from lots of different companies and contribute to lots of different organizations. So I get really excited about that future.
Yeah. And I think
it has lots of pain involved getting there, by the way, but hopefully we'll get there.
And it's, I'm thinking about my son having to do co-ops and internships and things like that. And why does that stop when we get the job? As though we rely on our employer to give us all the learning we will ever need ever again. And it's why universities invite speakers like you and me in to talk to them, is because the learning is not just inside the house. You have to go outside to get it, and you have to push yourself into uncomfortable places. And then the other thing I think that is from a value standpoint, is that it is not a corporate weakness to ask for help. It is not a corporate weakness to admit vulnerability. You only become vulnerable when you don't. And so there's something about the open innovation process, it would seem, that forces the company to say, we're vulnerable because we do have these 23 problems that we can't solve.
Absolutely.
And if I can admit it, I could actually address them. And if I just rely on the same hamster wheel, I am never going to get out of that. But at least I can create some innovation theater where it looks like we're working on it. Let's invite 20 startups in. They'll fix the problem for us.
Yeah. It's interesting you bring up vulnerability, because one form of open innovation is actually internal organizational open innovation, where you actually have crowds within the organization. And that's
usually how it starts, right? Yeah, it's like, let's ask the employees. The answer could be right here under our own roof.
And what we tell people is, like, if you're going to do that, you need to realize how vulnerability and innovation are tied. Because if you don't understand that as management, you are likely going to create your own Dilbert cartoon where people hate you, because you're going to dangle the carrot of innovation that everyone wants to do, but you're not actually going to let them do it. You're going to pretend you are. You're going to do that theater thing, but you're still going to treat them as if they're producing something on a schedule. And production and innovation are at odds with each other. You have to understand that. And that's why when a new hire says, I have a great idea, the older guys shut them down until they don't ask questions anymore, because they have schedules to meet. They have budgets to meet. And you don't have time for innovation. Innovation has to have its own special space where people are protected. We actually had a study once that said on our platform that innovation only happened when the comments and conversation became, actually the studiers said inappropriate, and it kind of got me worried. What they really meant was relaxed. So when people saw that you weren't going to make fun of their initial idea that they gave you, then they would give you their real idea. In other words, people hold back because they don't want their idea to be crushed. They don't want to be made fun of. And that idea of vulnerability is huge. Brené Brown has this great quote where she says, vulnerability is the birthplace of creativity, innovation, and entrepreneurship. And I think that is absolutely right. And one of the things I tell organizations is, if you're going to seriously try to innovate, and I do believe in innovate or die. I believe if you're not innovating, you probably won't be around in about 5 years, depending on who you are. But if you're serious about it, the only way you're going to make it to work is if you take it seriously, because it is one of the most dangerous endeavors that you're going to embark on in your company. Because if you do it wrong, your workforce will hate you.
Well, it's so fascinating. Listeners will want to tune in to the podcast with TD Ameritrade. And one of the, what they found was that this is exactly what they were doing, is that they asked everyone for their great ideas, their big ideas, fantastic, which they said led to, which felt like a bit of innovation theater, which then led to innovation anarchy. Yeah. And then led to a group of homeless ideas. And I thought about, you can almost picture the stage and the mosh pit and the people leaving there, right? Leaving the theater with these homeless ideas that have no place to go. And I said, wait a minute, did you open an innovation lab? Because that's a good place to hold homeless ideas, right? And it's off on Dr. Moreau's scary little island, right? Where the misfit ideas go and congregate, but never get executed on. Yeah. And I said, how did you solve for your homelessness problem, right? And she said, Gina Mitchell is fantastic. She said, we realized that the issue laid with the executives and that the executives need to be trained on how to evaluate innovative ideas. Yep. Where does it line up with our strategy? Where does it line up with our core values? Where does it line up with our 3-year, 5-year plan? And now we actually can train our senior executives, our executing committee on how to actually know which innovation ideas will work and which ones will not. We can invite them into the prototyping process and we can ask them to vote on where they see the vulnerabilities in the process given their giant purview over the organization and how critical their view and their insights were on what was a tiny idea that needed to get evaluated properly, because we don't even train our senior executives how to know if an innovation idea is a good one or a bad one.
Yep. Yeah. I have a whole cube I use on like value, commercialization, and technical difficulty, because it's really hard to.
It's complex.
And you really have to have the investment in the technical evaluate, the SMEs, right, the subject matter experts necessary to kind of advise you on that too, which a lot of places that'll do that suggestion box idea mistake, that's the mistake they make. They get all these great ideas and then they realize, oh, I've got to go use, millions of dollars worth of man hours of experts that I really want deployed elsewhere to evaluate these. And then that all falls apart.
Right.
I resonate with that 100%.
Because how many senior executives, right, at the C-suite will raise their hand and say, I don't know how to evaluate whether this is a good idea or a bad idea, because we make assumptions that because those C-level executives hired us, that they should intuitively know how to judge the validity of a new innovation. And that's not fair either, right? I mean, that isn't necessarily something that we can open to crowdsource, but we certainly can find the right trainers, much like yourself, to help senior executives to figure out how to guide the process within this corporate strategy.
Absolutely. Yeah. That entire process of kind of the push and pull of innovation is really interesting because, for instance, we're always really careful to only issue challenges on problems that have an owner, that are limited in scope, that someone can implement, that they know, like you want someone down the receiver. And what we find is a lot of times people try to solve problems that they've never talked to the stakeholders, they've never understood, or they have an idea. It's fascinating in the innovation spectrum because if you're not careful, you'll get kind of the mad scientists popping up who are trying to solve problems you never asked them to solve and that aren't actually problems to solve. And they're
or validated with any customer, whether or not they actually had the problem or they already have the solution in mind. They invented.
Those people are the loudest usually, and the ones that give innovation a bad name within an organization, because what happens is middle managers will make these innovation calls. We need innovation. Give us your stuff and we'll fund it. And you get all the crazies coming out that aren't aligned to any strategic goals, that aren't trying to solve the problems that the C-suite wants. And that's where, there's got to be work done, the work you were talking about, where you've got to actually understand how that breaks down and how it's assigned in your organization and who's responsible and who all the stakeholders are. One of the things in innovation I'm pretty preachy about is we almost always don't spend enough time understanding the problem. That Einstein,
huge.
Of the 55 minutes looking at the problem before you try to solve it. We find that over and over. And so I think that's the biggest gap I've seen in almost every innovation program is there's not a systematic method and a trained set of people that facilitate the problem analysis necessary to even start talking about how we find innovation to improve and solve that problem.
Yeah. And I think that's something that Brene Brown calls the messy middle, is that you really have to wade through that swamp of going, I have to stick my hand in here and see what's wrong. Yeah. I have to look at this from 6 different perspectives in order to get a handle on what could really be driving this or what's really aching. In New York, we always want to ask the question, where is the customer bleeding from the neck? Because we're violent people here in New York. But, but understanding where the agony isn't always so straightforward. And I often use the example of Uber, feeling so many of our pain points, that we didn't just like having to put our hand up and wait for a yellow cab. We didn't want to pay in cash. We wanted to have the right currency. We wanted to know what time the car was coming. We wanted to know if there would be water in the backseat. We wanted to know if our driver was safe. There are 1,000 things that Uber solved for that we didn't even know we hated until I had the realization when I was waiting for an Uber and 3 yellow taxis passed me by, and I was fine with it. And I realized at that point that Uber was not a transportation company trying to get me from point A to point B. It was actually trying to solve a whole host of problems that I didn't even know I had. But I knew the sense of relief I felt when they were solved.
Can I just say, if you just substitute Uber for future of work, that's what's going to happen. Like right now, everyone's asking, how can I trust that worker that this service is going to get me to do this work? How can I trust that they're going to get it on time, or that they're not going to give away my IP, or that they can do it? How can I, and it's all about that low friction, right? What Uber did was they reduced the friction for you getting a ride, the worry you had, the impatience you had. Like they solved all of that. You didn't have to get your wallet out. You didn't have to worry about what to tip. And all of that was solving those problems you didn't know you had. That's what's about to happen in the workplace.
Well, there's one more thing. They forced me, right? They also allowed me to overcome the number one lesson that a girl gets from her mother before she goes out at night, which is never get into a car with a stranger, right? I mean, that is the number one job safety rule of mom. And we overcame that.
I still look back at that and think, I remember when somebody described Uber to me and I thought, oh, that sounds great. I don't know that I can ever get in some stranger's car. But then what we all realized is we had all been getting in. Like, and it's the same we tell people all the time, they're like, how can I trust a freelancer? Like, well, how do you trust your employee? And people forget. They look at background checks when they hire, and that's the last time they look at anything going on with their finances or whether they're being, blackmailed or anything, right? All of
the occasional drug test.
Yeah. All of those things, we tell people, look, there's more to it. Some really great work that's going on with Open Assembly and John Windsor and some of the folks at Harvard is really all about how do we attack these problems. And there's some really great work going on in portability of reputation on freelance platforms so that you can move from one to another. If you think about that for a second, they're capturing data in ways that HR departments can't even dream about, right? They're
can't fathom, yeah.
Every single task, how well they did it, how quickly they did it, what the price point was, what the specific skills were, and they're capturing all that what I call digital exhaust, right? And they're capturing it in ways that if you think about it, if I work 5 years at Freelancer, well, if I decide I want to go over here and work over at Upwork, well, I should own that, right? And so we're working on kind of standards for how you'd own that. But you also wouldn't want the individual to be able to change it, right? So we're looking at this blockchain solution and kind of managing reputation that really has some trust elements. There's a company called, I'm going to forget it now, Swiss something. Anyway, in Europe that actually has already done this. There's a blockchain reputation that is, once you do the background check, it is captured in blockchain and you can carry it around and show that and not have to do it over and over for every HR. And it's just, there's some fascinating groups like that going on that are
the fact that we rely on resumes that I create to say how awesome I am at this point as an employee, like that hasn't bitten 1,000 HR leaders in the butt 1,000,000 times over, and we go, but can I trust a freelancer? Like, can you even trust the resume that's sitting in front of you that I wrote about me? to say how awesome I am.
Managers usually have a ton of data, a ton more data.
Right.
I actually joke with people. I say, in 10 years or so, we're going to look back and we're going to kind of stare at wonder each other and say, how did we hire people based on 2 pages or 5 pages or whatever a resume is? In 30 minutes of talking, how did we ever understand that they were a good fit for some nebulous, not job, but like position, right? That had lots of jobs that they had to do, or lots of tasks, versus somewhere where you can actually match people exactly to what they're best at. And the most exciting thing I think is about to happen is these platforms are going to start learning how to put high-performing passion teams together, where everyone's an expert and tuned to a given task with diversity. You're going to know. If you've ever worked on a high-performing team, I think you just start getting tingly at the thought.
The Avengers comes to work.
About one of these communities with 500,000 people that gets a problem in and says, hey, we want to solve this problem, and overnight is able to match, 50 different teams in different compositions to go work on that at a different stage. Like, the innovation that's going to be possible in that kind of construct starts to give me goosebumps.
And that's the kind of story I want to tell. That's awesome. Steve, this conversation has just been riveting. Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise, your 30 years of working at NASA and looking at, everything that is open innovation, because you are carving a pathway for us to understand how we will work in ways that we never thought possible before. And I believe that open innovation starts with an open mind. If we can't open ourselves up to our own biases, our own vulnerability, and the diversity that makes innovation great, then we are going to be leaving a lot of innovation on the table.
Totally agree. Thank you so much for having me, Susan. This has been fabulous. I love it.
So if people want to get in touch with you, Steve, what is the best way to connect with you and your awesome consulting firm? Best way is LinkedIn. Just reach out to me on LinkedIn. I've got a website and the rest, but you can usually always get me on LinkedIn. And it's Rader ER, not AR. That's right. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Steve. Have a great one. Okay, thanks.
This innovation story has ended, but yours is just beginning. Go to innovationstorytellers.com, download the free Innovation Storytelling Blueprint, and sign up to pre-order Susan's book, Innovation Storytelling. Get the resources, runway, and recognition you deserve due out this spring. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Until the next innovation story.